Over the course of history, there have been many aircraft that pilots loved to fly, some which they weren't such fans of, and some which they were just plain fearful of. Not because they looked intimidating or sounded scary, because there are certain design flaws which only these pilots got to find out about, and it's safe to say that the MD-11 is one of these aircraft. Tonight we're going to be looking at some of the fatal design flaws which doomed the MD-11 to failure, and which made it one of the most controversial airliners in history. Do make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. This is the MD-11 story. Now, there are few airliners in history which carry a legacy similar to that of the McDonnell Douglas MD-11. On the surface of it, it's a sort of jet that looks sleek and elegant. It has sophisticated looks, but behind that elegant facade, something more deadly lies, as a series of fatal design flaws led to a number of continuous issues over the course of the MD-11's lifespan. Pilots ended up learning pretty early on that the MD-11 was not the sort of aircraft you could relax in. It was a plane that demanded precision, the sort that punished hesitation, and behaviours could turn routine flight into an absolute fight for control. A plane that looked like the future, but a plane that carried problems deep rooted in the past. Even to this day, the MD-11 is spoken about with a sense of respect, a sense of fear, and a sense of fascination which still boggles the mind in 2025. And we're going to uncover why, even with its design flaws, some aviators still love this machine more than any other they ever flew. This is the overlooked, dramatic, and often misunderstood story of the MD-11, an aircraft that promised greatness but delivered a reputation unlike anything else in the sky. Now, initially the MD-11 was not designed to be scary. It wasn't meant to be unpredictable, unforgiving, or feared. In fact, when the design first appeared on the table, the MD-11 was supposed to be the exact opposite. The MD-11 was intended to be a miracle, the comeback jet, the aircraft that could save McDonnell Douglas from slipping into irrelevance. By the late 80s, we were seeing the landscape changing dramatically. We had seen the 747 and 767 from Boeing. This was a time where Airbus was pushing aggressively with the A300 and the brand new A320. And we were also seeing McDonnell Douglas, once a titan in the golden age, falling behind, losing orders, losing market share, and losing confidence from airlines and the world. Executives inside the company knew it. If they didn't deliver something big and deliver it fast, their future aircraft company could simply end. So they made a bold decision. Instead of designing a clean sheet aircraft which would take years and essentially take time that they didn't have, they were going to take an aging DC-10, a workhorse with a complicated legacy of its own, and they were going to transform that into something new. It was going to be something sleeker, something more efficient, and something that looked modern enough to compete with offerings from Europe and Seattle. And on paper, this jet actually sounded almost magical. They sketched a fuselage which could carry more passengers. They reshaped the wings, slimming them down, adding winglets to squeeze out more efficiency. They upgraded the engines, giving them more thrust yet burning less fuel. They installed one of the most advanced two-pilot digital cockpits of the time. There was no need for a crew member, and this is of course in the 1980s. They were talking about an aircraft with longer range, more innovation, and lower running costs than other jets could provide. They talked about this as being the perfect trijet for the next few decades. And McDonnell Douglas delivered a set of promises to airlines which sounded almost too good to be true. The aircraft was intended to burn 15% less fuel compared to the DC-10. It had a fully digital glass cockpit, reducing the crew's workload. It had more range for intercontinental routes, and perhaps most importantly, it had a perfected, improved, modern design over the DC-10, and this was supposed to be one of its major selling points. And airlines believed it, and many loved it. Because why wouldn't they? Whilst the DC-10 it was based on had its own controversies, it was a known quantity. If McDonnell Douglas could refine it, strengthen it, and update it for the modern day, they could create something that was genuinely competitive. But here's the part where the story changes to a level and a manner which was never even printed on the brochures. The MD-11 was never going to be a new aircraft. It was fundamentally a DC-10 skeleton with futuristic ambitions on top. It was a design from the 1960s pushed deep into the 1990s, and the harder McDonnell Douglas pushed it, the more they stretched the original airframe, the more they squeezed from the wings, the more they slimmed the tail, and the more they demanded from the aircraft, the further it went from the DC-10 than it was ever meant to be. Engineers inside the company knew it, they were reaching the limits. But the pressure was immense. The company had financial pressure, and survival pressure of the company ended up compromising what the project was ever supposed to be. The plane ended up with a smaller horizontal stabilizer to cut drag and improve fuel burn, even if it meant reduced pitch authority. We saw wings optimized for cruise efficiency. Whilst this did help with fuel burn, it made it even harder to assert pitch authority. Wings were optimized for cruise efficiency and certainly not for forgiving handling during takeoff and landing, an issue which we are going to see become absolutely fatal in just a few moments. The cockpit of the aircraft was designed to do more with less, but it ended up relying heavily on pilots staying ahead with a very demanding aircraft and a stretched fuselage which redistributed the weight of the plane and altered its center of gravity in ways which would later prove challenging. Each individual compromise made sense on paper, but together, one after one, this would end up becoming more of a temperamental design than was ever even publicly admitted. Airlines were promised a long-range, modern, relatively easy-to-fly jet. However, what actually turned out was something very different. Something that flew beautifully in cruise, but had hidden behaviours which were not shown on the surface during the most critical phases of flight. This was a sort of aircraft that just didn't behave how the textbooks said it should. But the MD-11's flaws did not just show up overnight, they were made clear over time, flight after flight, takeoff after takeoff and landing after landing. The MD-11 wasn't about one big failure, it was a story of many compromises, each one logical in isolation, but together created an aircraft that pilots would forever approach with caution. Compromises that ultimately pilots and passengers would face the price of. And this is where the story turns, because the MD-11 had several characteristics that made it even more dangerous than many other commercial jets, and to understand why pilots feared it, we need to understand what its biggest issues were first. The first thing is that the tail was too small for the size of the aircraft. Because McDonnell Douglas wanted the MD-11 to be more fuel efficient, they ended up shrinking the horizontal stabilizer, the part of the tail which helps the aircraft to pitch up or down. Yes, they made it smaller on a bigger aircraft, and this meant that the plane had less pitch authority. It meant that small mistakes would become big problems, and the aircraft ended up reacting more aggressively during landings, which would become very, very dangerous. Many pilots described this aircraft as one which wanted to sink towards the ground when flying. The MD-11's wing design also made it extremely sensitive on top of this. The wings were updated to reduce drag, but they also made the aircraft more unstable in gusty conditions, less forgiving during flare, and highly sensitive to pitch changes. It required constant correction, it demanded absolute precision, and this was a sort of plane where if you were only slightly off, just a little too fast or a little too slow, things could go wrong instantly. Pilots used to make the joke that the MD-11 is a sort of aircraft that flies great until it doesn't, and this ended up being true on so many occasions. One of its most scary behaviours is that it had a brutal tendency to drop out during landing, and this was a big one. Because of the tail and wing changes, the MD-11 had a nasty habit of suddenly losing lift during the landing flare, not slowly, but instantly. You'd pull back expecting a smooth touchdown. Instead, the aircraft would slam into the runway like it weighed twice as much as it actually did. This phenomenon gave it a nickname, the MD-11 arrival. Translation was a harder arriving than normal. It was something that pilots ended up expecting. And if you think that's scary enough, a small bounce could actually end up in a catastrophic crash. Yes, that is right. Many other aircraft could and still can bounce and recover, but the MD-11, not so much. Because of the aircraft's limited tail control and stiffer landing gear, if the plane bounced even slightly, terrible things could happen. Pilots saw the nose pitching down, lift collapsing, and the aircraft hit the runway extremely violently. This ended up leading to several deadly accidents where the MD-11 flipped, broke apart, or disintegrated. And pilots knew this. They felt it every single time they brought the aircraft down onto a runway. One mistake, one gust of wind, and one misjudgment, and things could go wrong extremely fast with the MD-11. And this might not be a surprise, but all of these factors led to a slurry of incidents with the MD-11. These were the accidents that built the MD-11's most fearful reputation. The track record ended up not helping. In the 1990s and 2000s, there were several high-profile crashes which reinforced its reputation as a dangerous aircraft to land. We're not going to go into the gory detail of all of these facts, but if you want to have a look online, it's not too hard to find out about MD-11 crashes. The fact of the matter is, most of the fatal accidents didn't happen in cruise, they didn't even happen in takeoff, or from mechanical failure. It was the landing. And this is because it was the moment that pilots needed the most pitch authority over the aircraft, and the MD-11 just simply didn't give it to them. The MD-11 was an aircraft with an unusually high number of rollover crashes. This is where the MD-11 struck the ground nose first. The wings often snapped, causing the plane to cartwheel. This happened to FedEx Flight 80, FedEx Flight 14, and China Airlines Flight 642. These were not minor incidents. These were catastrophic and violent crashes which left a permanent scar on the MD-11's reputation, and pilots learnt to fear the bounce. The MD-11's behaviour became legendary for all of the wrong reasons. Pilots said that if an MD-11 bounces, go around and don't try to save it. It wasn't superstition, it was an attempt at survival. This aircraft was simply dangerous. But despite all of these potentially fatal design flaws, many pilots still loved this aircraft. This is a surprising twist about it, because despite all of its dangers, the MD-11 was a devoted favourite of pilots who loved flying it. Why? One of the reasons perhaps was because it was a challenge. Pilots who mastered the MD-11 felt like they had achieved something difficult, something elite. It wasn't the sort of plane that you could fly lazily. It demanded your attention, your skills, and your precision at all times. And when the aircraft did get going, it was powerful and quick. The MD-11 was one of the fastest wide-body jets ever built for commercial use. It cruised high, it cruised fast, it was essentially a rocket with wings, and its cockpit was way ahead of its time. The avionics were extremely futuristic for the early 1990s. This plane had glass displays, advanced automation, and a two-pilot cockpit again in the 1990s. For the tech-focused pilots out there, the MD-11 was a dream, and cargo pilots loved its range. FedEx and UPS flew the MD-11 for decades because it could carry heavy loads incredibly far. Even today, a number of MD-11s still remain in service despite all of its design quirks and flaws. But ultimately, and for the most part, with the exception of cargo airlines, many airlines ultimately moved away from the MD-11. The reasons were because the promised fuel savings never ended up materializing. Its landing characteristics scared the crews. Airlines ended up just preferring more modern, more safe, and more elegant designs into the future. Boeing ended up discontinuing the program after merging with McDonnell Douglas, and by the early 2010s, almost all passenger versions were retired. The aircraft that was supposed to save McDonnell Douglas ended up becoming a cautionary tale, and one towards the end of the company's lifespan. Now, whilst controversial, you can love or hate the MD-11, but this is the sort of aircraft that pilots do still talk about. In the end, the MD-11 became something far more complex than just an aircraft to save McDonnell Douglas. It wasn't a flawless long-range superstar that brochures had promised. It wasn't a technological step forwards in the way that the company needed to survive. And it certainly wasn't an easy-flying, pilot-friendly trijet that would carry them into the next century. Instead, it became a legend for very, very different reasons. Pilots who flew it learned quickly that the aircraft had a personality. It demanded attention, respect, and a level of precision that bordered on perfection. It could be smooth, it could be powerful, and it could be extremely elegant at altitude. But it was also the same plane that would challenge the same pilots as soon as those wheels came near to the runway. It was a machine that rewarded skill. It was a machine that punished the careless. The sort of craft that felt far ahead of its time in some ways and far behind in many others. Today, most MD-11s rest in storage, some still flying their last service rounds as cargo airliners. But the legacy of the MD-11 still lives on. One of controversy, because it taught lessons. It humbled even some of the most experienced aviators. Perhaps because it reminded the industry that no amount of optimism or design automation can overcome fundamental flaws of physics. Pilots still talk about the MD-11 because it left its mark on them, a mark of respect, a mark of caution, and for some, admiration, the jet that made them feel better, sharper, and more aware. In a world of forgiving, predictable airliners, the MD-11 stands apart, a reminder that sometimes the most feared create legends. Despite all of its flaws, the fact that so many MD-11s still fly across our skies today perhaps is a testament to how amazing this craft could be and some of its amazing features, despite its fundamental flaws which ultimately held it back. The MD-11 is another one of these aircraft that so many people, if not everyone, has an opinion on. Everybody's got something to say about it, and not everybody is a fan, but some people do still really love this plane. So guys, let me know your thoughts on the MD-11 down in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd like to say I use no AI to make these videos. I know the setup is very basic, but if you do appreciate it, do help me out by liking and subscribing because I am trying to grow the channel. Thank you and goodbye for now.